Morning, everyone. Welcome to another session of the TeTra seminar. Our speaker today is Anna Ohanjanyan, who is head of the Department for the Study of the Armenian Texts of the 15th to 19th centuries at the Mashtots Research Institute of Ancient Manuscripts, Matenadaran, in Yerevan. She is also an associate professor at Yerevan State University. She did her postdoc at Central European University in Budapest within the ERC project Auto Confession and New Europe College in Bucharest. Her research interests include history of confessions, confessional dynamics of early modern Armenian communities, polemical literature, medieval and early Armenian interfaith dialogue. She's preparing to publish her new monograph, Orthodoxy and Orthopraxy in the Armenian Polemical Literature from Ottoman and Safavid Context, 17th to 18th centuries. Anna, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Andy, for this nice introduction. Let me share first the slides. And I'll start right away. Okay. Thank you everyone for joining. Today I'm going to speak about sort of very complicated, but a unique and important collection, which is called Tōnapatchaṛ, and is very specific to Armenian manuscript tradition. The structure of my presentation is very simple, since no one usually doesn't know what is Tōnapatchaṛ. I would start with 4 questions: what, when, how, and why. What is Tōnapatchaṛ? When was it composed? How has it developed? And why is it polemical? Tōnapatchaṛ, literally, the causes of feast days, is one of the defining creations of medieval Armenian theological literature. It is an exegetical and doctrinal collection that explains the origin, structure, and meaning of the feasts in the Armenian liturgical calendar. The title joins Tōn in Armenian, which is feast, with Patchaṛ, which is cause, expressing its purpose as an exposition of the theological causes of the festivals celebrated by the Armenian Church. Tōnapatchaṛ was also known under the titles Causes of Feast Days and Commentary on the Lectionary, Explanation of Feast Days, Exegesis on the Pericopes, along with other materials, Causes of Celebration of Feasts, and many others. The work is not a lectionary, a homiliary, or a synaxary in the usual sense. It is a specifically Armenian compilation of commentaries arranged in the order of the liturgical year. Its content combines exegetical, doctrinal, patristic, and hagiographic pieces. Fragments from Ephraim the Syrian, John Chrysostom, Gregory Nazianzen appear beside Armenian homilies, hymns, and prayers. Within the Armenian tradition, the Tōnapatchaṛ occupies a position distinct from other ecclesiastical compilations, such as the Lectionary, the Calendar, or the Homiliary. Whereas those books were primarily practical or liturgical in nature, the Tōnapatchaṛ was largely a theological commentary intended for instruction and reflection within monastic schools. Scholars whose name I am not sure will tell you much, but either way I will pronounce them, Paylak Antabian and Rafik Vartanyan, who also was my teacher, have emphasized that the Tōnapatchaṛ differs substantially from the festal homiliary or synaxary. Its primary purpose was not the daily reading of saints' lives or the performance of the liturgy, but rather the interpretation of feast days and the explanation of their theological causes. In monastic settings, the Tōnapatchaṛ functioned as a pedagogical or didactical text, a manual through which monks and clerics could study the doctrinal meanings of the church liturgical cycle. At its core, the Tōnapatchaṛ represents a uniquely Armenian synthesis of exegesis, theology, polemics, and liturgical commentary. Yet, as we shall see, it also is a historical document. It reflects the intellectual, political, and confessional tensions that shaped the Armenian Church's identity between the 17th and 14th centuries. But first and foremost, it is a polemical collection, again diaphysates. When was it composed? The origins of the Tōnapatchaṛ collection have been the subject of scholarly debate. One of the earliest references occurs in the colophon of manuscripts, which is kept in Matenadaran. You can see the number. Which belongs to 13th century, and it attributes the beginning of the feast day commentaries to James, the brother of the Lord, and associates with them with the Jerusalem calendar. We have a nice colophon here in this manuscript, according to which Aristakes, the son of Saint Gregory the Illuminator, the founder of Armenian Church as an institution, brought the canon of feast days and the corresponding critics from the Council of Nicaea to Armenia. Modern scholarship, particularly the analysis of my teacher, Rafik Vartanyan, has clarified that this colophon refers not to the Tōnapatchaṛ as such, but rather to the Jerusalem Lectionary. That is, to the list of feast days. I mean this colophon. But it has a continuation which already speaks about the Tōnapatchaṛ. The Tōnapatchaṛ, in contrast, emerged later as a commentarial response to those lectionary traditions. The same manuscript colophon continues. You can see it on the screen. It says that when the calendar was brought to Armenia, our holy Catholicos Zakaria and other holy teachers took from their words the calendar and readings and enlightened the faithful, which means they created kind of interpretations on the lectionary. What was the prototype of Tōnapatchaṛ? It has a prototype, of course, before it developed to a much elaborated collection. The prototype of Tōnapatchaṛ is attributed to Grigoris Arshāruni, a co-episcopos or rural bishop of the Ayrarat region, which is also Arshārunis, who lived in the 7th to 8th centuries. Grigoris Arshāruni composed a commentary on the lectionary in 34 chapters. This text offered explanations of the Dominical feast days, that is, the feast of the Lord, and the scriptural pericopes appointed for those days. Arshāruni's commentary, modeled on the catechetical lectures of Saint Cyril of Jerusalem, served as the foundation for later developments of Tōnapatchaṛ. Subsequent theologians, among them Catholicos Zakaria Zagetsi in the 9th century, Aristakes Lastivertsi in the 11th century, and Samuel Kamrjadzor in the late 10th or early 11th century, expanded and refined this material. Across these centuries, the Tōnapatchaṛ evolved from a modest exegetical aid into an extensive collection, integrated theological discourse, homiletic commentary, and ecclesiastical history. An important structural feature of almost all surviving Tōnapatchaṛ manuscripts underlines its doctrinal importance. The collection typically begins with the feast of David and James, the brother of the Lord, celebrated on December 25th in the Armenian Church. This ordering is deliberate. It asserts that the Armenian Church does not commemorate the Nativity of Christ on December 25th, as the Byzantine and Georgian churches did and do, but rather on January 6th, combining the Nativity and Theophany in a single feast following the ancient Jerusalem tradition. In this regard, Andreas, the scribe of Matenadaran manuscript M1888, provides the structural formula of the collection. You can see this formula on the screen, which provides us with the first unit of the Tōnapatchaṛ collection and the last unit of the collection. This is an ideal formula, as it should be. In this way, the Tōnapatchaṛ defines the Armenian Church's liturgical identity against its Chalcedonian neighbors. Therefore, the Tōnapatchaṛ was both exegetical and polemical. Now we move to the part 3, how Tōnapatchaṛ has developed. Two main recensions, or I rather call them recension branches, emerged: the Kamrjadzor recension or recension branch and the Haghpat branch. First, let's discuss the Kamrjadzor recension. You can see a picture of where Kamrjadzor monastery of Mother of Lord used to be, but it is demolished. As you can see only the cells on the picture where the hermits would spend their lives. So here they created actually the more or less elaborate first Tōnapatchaṛ recension as it is circulated today. Samuel Kamrjadzoretsy was the inventor or compiler of Tōnapatchaṛ as we have it now. So Kamrjadzor recension associated with the monastery of Kamrjadzor in Ayrarat, the same Arsharunis, represents the earlier stage of the collection's evolution. Its principal figure, Samuel of Kamrjadzor or Kamrjadzoretsy, is identified as the inventor of the complete Tōnapatchaṛ. He enlarged the earlier commentary by Grigoris Arsharuni, this one, and added extensive patristic quotations and organized the material by the liturgical year. 7 orations attributed to Catholicos Zakhariah were inserted together with Samuel's own explanations of Lenten and festal readings. A colophon describes the work as the praise and crown of the Church, the rival against evil, the purifier of the Orthodox faith, revealing its purpose as a text of doctrinal affirmation. This language demonstrates that even at this stage, the Tōnapatchaṛ was not conceived merely as a didactic compilation, but as a testimony to orthodoxy or a defense of doctrinal purity within the Armenian tradition. The Kamrjadzor recension retained a primarily exegetical and pedagogical function, serving as a monastic handbook for theological study. Yet, it also set the precedent for later polemical uses of the text. Now we move to the Haghpat recensions or Haghpat recension branch. The Haghpat recension formed at the monastery of Haghpat in northern Armenia marks a later and more developed stage. You can see the monastery on the screen. It is very well preserved today and it functions. This recension of Տօնապատճառ, Haghpat recension of Տօնապատճառ, was initiated by Վարդան Haghpatեցի with the approval of Catholicos Nersēs Shnorhali. The new version of Տօնապատճառ concentrated on the principal feasts of the liturgical year and presented a more systematized arrangement of commentaries. Composed in the setting of the Armenian Byzantine theological dialogue of the 12th century, it reflects the renewed discussions of union between the churches under Emperor Manuel I Komnenos and Nersēs Shnorhali. Within this environment, the Տօնապատճառ was reshaped into a work that served not only to interpret but also to defend the Armenian faith. Vartan's recension established a new canon of composition for subsequent centuries. His successors included Vartan Արևելցի, Հովանես Գանձակեցի, and Հովանես Երզնկացի, each of whom produced further redactions based on the Haghpatեցի's model. These later authors enriched the collection with fresh commentaries, polemical units adapted to their own historical circumstances. It is safe to assume that from the 12th century onward, the Տօնապատճառ developed into two principal streams: the Kamrjadzor recensions, emphasizing exegesis and instruction, and the Haghpat recensions, which adopted a distinctly polemical orientation. Now, what was this Haghpat recension and why it had polemical character? The Haghpat recension stands out for its intellectual coherence and its distinctly polemical orientation. The intense polemical tone of the Haghpat recension reflects the complex ecclesiastical politics of the 12th and 13th centuries. During this period, the Byzantine Emperor, as I said already, Manuel Komnenos, initiated negotiations for the reunion of the Byzantine and Armenian Churches, and Catholicos Nersēs Shnorhali responded sympathetically, envisioning unity based on mutual understanding. Yet, the underlying theological disagreements, especially concerning Christology and the liturgical calendar, remained profound. This process of unity started around 1165 and lasted till 1178, the tenure of Armenian Catholicos Տղա, or youth. The negotiations were held in two rounds, and Վարդան Haghpatեցի, who was the author of the first Haghpat recension, participated in the first round of the negotiations that took place in Rumkale, in Hromkla, in 1169-1170 as a member of the Armenian delegation, after which he returned to Great Armenia, Haghpat Monastery, and commenced the composition of new recension of the Tōnapatchaṛ. I would like to underline here that this was a big project initiated by Վարդան Haghpatեցի, or Վարդան of Haghpat, and Catholicos Nersēs Shnorhali. It was approved by Nersēs Shnorhali before his death, and it was charged with extreme polemical content and passion also. So the Haghpat theologians, among them Վարդան Haghpatեցի and later Վարդան Արևելցի, composed their new recensions of the Տոնապատճառ within this context. Their work sought to demonstrate that the distinctive practices of the Armenian Church were not deviations, but legitimate continuation of the apostolic and Jerusalem traditions. The polemical function of the Haghpat recensions is expressed through its exegetical method. The Haghpat recensions use exegetical commentary as a polemical tool. Interpretation itself becomes argument. Through detailed interpretation of scripture and patristic sources, they defended the Armenian position on several key issues. The first is the liturgical calendar. The Armenian Church celebrated the combined feast of the Nativity and Theophany on January 6th, whereas the Byzantine Church separated them, celebrating the Nativity on December 25th. The Tōnapatchaṛ insists that the Armenian practice follows the earliest Jerusalem tradition and therefore preserves the more ancient usage. And the second clause is Miaphysite Christology. In opposition to Chalcedonian diaphysitism, the Haghpat commentaries affirm the one incarnate nature of the word, articulating an Armenian Miaphysite orthodoxy consistent with the positions of the non-Chalcedonian churches. A central element of the Haghpat tradition of Tōnapatchaṛ is the integration of the Armenian translations of the orations of Gregory Nazianzen. Gregory's sermons, long treasured in Armenian theology, occupy a prominent place in these compilations. Passages from his homilies on the Nativity, Epiphany, and Easter, Pascha, are accompanied by Armenian commentaries that align his teaching with the Christological position of the Armenian Church. By invoking Gregory's authority, the Haghpat authors presented their own Miaphysite theology as the authentic continuation of patristic orthodoxy. In one colophon, a scribe describes the Tōnapatchaṛ as the praise and crown of the church, as I already mentioned. Such formulation underlines the work's response to exegetical theological pressures, to external theological pressures. Another colophon, which you can see on the screen, it is dated to 1357, already 14th century, preserved information proving the collection's polemical vector. So you can see that it here we have the first part of the colophon, which speaks about the duophysites, and the rest is here. I would like to read the whole thing now, and this is also the commentary and explanation by the church fathers, Peter of Alexandria and Gregory the theologian, and John Chrysostom and Archimandrite Anania, Epiphanius of Salamis, Ephraim the Syrian, and Basil the Great, and other God-bearing men who testify concerning the Nativity and Epiphany and all Dominical feasts, and silence the mouths of heretics who put the Nativity on December 25th and Annunciation on March 25th. But for us, Orthodox Armenians, with the apostolic order and testimonies of the scripture, the Nativity is celebrated on January 6th, and the Annunciation is on April 6th, 7, which was established and celebrated by the apostles and all the Orthodox who followed their profession of faith until the cursed Artemon, who himself was led astray and led astray those approving of his will. And that Artemon took a curse upon himself as he cast division between the peoples. In the later copies of Tōnapatchaṛ produced under Vartan Arevelsy and Hovannes Yerzhengatsi, the same orientation continues, polemical orientation. Their editions expand the patristic material and adapt the commentary for new monastic audiences while retaining the same defensive character. The Haghpat recension transforms the Tōnapatchaṛ from a didactic compilation into a polemical collection or anthology, a literary affirmation of Armenian orthodoxy grounded in exegesis, and very authoritative exegesis. And a conclusion. In conclusion, I would say, I would like to conclude that by saying that Tōnapatchaṛ collection, which contains the introductions of and commentaries on the feast days according to the Armenian Church tradition, is an exegetical work, first of all, charged with polemical content, second of all, serving as didactical material for the students of theological schools. From theological point of view, however, the collection is oriented towards Christology and soteriology, as it aims to proclaim and explain the Armenian Church doctrine about Christ and the economy of salvation through the interpretation of the episodes of the life and teachings of Christ repeated in the Armenian Church's festal rituals. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Anna, for guiding through this fascinating collection of texts, the Tōnapatchaṛ, and for letting us know what this content is, how it developed in different tradition. And yeah, I'm sure we all learned a lot today. We now open the floor for discussion. If you have a question, you can either raise your hand physically or electronically, or write it down in the chat. We will read it for you if you cannot speak if you can speak aloud. Maybe to start us off, I can throw in a first question. I was wondering, while you were describing the two different recensions, two different collections, if you could tell us a little bit also about the manuscript tradition of these texts. So how many manuscripts are we talking about? Do we have a lot of differences among them? And thanks.
Yes, we have a lot of manuscripts, actually most of them from both recensions, but mostly from Kamrjadzor, this recension. Kamrjadzor, the recension manuscripts are more than from Haghpat recension. Kamrjadzor recension manuscripts are mainly kept in Matenadaran. Most of them are in Matenadaran. And in comparison with Haghpat recension, there is a lot of differences. They are completely different. What can I say about Kamrjadzor recension is that here we have very, many units which have titles, and in titles you have the indication of the author. For example, just let me give you an example. We have like a unit which speaks about the ascension of Lord, and it indicates where it is taken from. It says, on the ascension of the Lord by Yerevan the Syrian, John Chrysostom, Zachariah, Armenian Catholicos, and Stepanos. So we know the authors. You have this pattern throughout the Kamrjadzor recension. Of course, as it develops, many units are added to the recension, and in different copies you have the basic material, but also added material. In many copies from 17th century, we have absolutely new units, either exegetical or patristic or even hagiographic, which have not been the part of Tōnapatchaṛ. It's in its original version, a 10th century, 11th century version. But throughout the copies, this pattern where you have the names of the authors appears. When it comes to Haghpat recension, there are usually no indications of authors, and in Haghpat recension, Tōnapatchaṛ, we have more interwoven texts, like Philokalia, without any mention of the authors, like all Catena exegesis, without any mention of the authors. Here, the most important part is the compiler's interpretation, Վարդան Հաղպատեցիս or Վարդան Արևելցիս interpretations, which are very polemical. That's why it was the most important part. As for manuscript tradition, as I said, we have around 30 manuscripts or 30-35 manuscripts from Kamrjadzor recension from different centuries. I don't really count 17, 18 recensions much if they are not very important. So all these recensions that I'm talking about are from 12th to 14th, 15th centuries. As for Haghpat recension, we have less. Sometimes we have a combination. But the thing is that in all these recension branches, we have sub-recensions. As you can see, for Kamrjadzor recension branch, we have sub-recensions by Zaghetsi, Lastivertsi, Kamrjadzoreti, Ganzaketsi. So all these compilers brought something new into their recension, yet they belong to Kamrjadzor. And when it comes to a manuscript tradition, you have all of these different sub-recensions in this broader recension. And it's a very complicated and very meticulous job, actually, to systematize them and to categorize them, because you never have the same collection. You always have something new. As for Haghpat broad recension, you can see here we have Haghpatetsis sub-recension, Arevelstis, Ganzaketsis, and Yerznkatsis sub-recension. Yerznkatsis sub-recension is very interesting, and it has survived only in 2 copies. One is in Venice, in Mechiterist congregation, and the other is here in Matenadaran. Both of them are unique. Both of them almost mirror each other. I mean, the later copy mirrors the earlier copy, and they were written for Yerzunga or Erzincan fraternity, which was founded during Yerzungatis times, and they had their own code, and this recension of Tōnapatchaṛ was created specifically for this fraternity, but it is based actually on Haghpatetsis Arevelstis recension. As for Haghpatetsis recension, we have a couple of manuscripts, but one of the most important manuscripts is held here in Matenadaran, which is Matenadaran manuscript 2021. This has the most concise structure, which shows how it looked like actually in the 12th century, before other units were added to this recension in later centuries. Arevelstis recension, sub-recension within Haghpat broader recension branch is one of the most copied ones when it comes to Haghpat recensions. And it is notable because it includes many units penned by Vartan Arevelstis, which are not found elsewhere in his works. So those are very unique, especially the commentaries on the Lenten period, and also the commentaries on Gregory of Nazianzen's couple of orations. That is oration on Epiphany, oration on Easter, and oration on Ascension. Yes.
Thank you very much. I have several follow-up questions, especially because it's fascinating that the collection that has a more polemical focus doesn't quote as much the sources or like where the texts come from. I would expect the opposite from Syriac dogmatic collection. But before I go on with my follow-ups, I would like to give the floor to Skipert.
Yes, thank you very much indeed, Anna. This was excellent and gave me a lot of new insights into this genre of texts that I have never studied. Working on lectionaries, of course, I'm quite familiar with the problem that you talked about of the definition of the date of Nativity and Epiphany between 25th of December and 6th of January. Do the Tōnapatchaṛs discuss the question of which lections from the Gospels had to be read? As far as I remember, in the oldest Armenian lectionaries on the 6th of January, which should be a nativity, the first lection that is read from the Gospel of Matthew is not the lection from the first chapter, which is about nativity, but from the second chapter, which is about Epiphany. So there is something going on there which I've never understood. And if I remember well, there is even a third interpretation of the day in the Armenian tradition, namely as belonging to the baptism of Jesus Christ, which
Yes.
would be rather in line with the Western style. So is there anything that they talk about the actual choice of pericopes that had to be read on those days?
Thank you very much for a very interesting question. When I am working mainly on Haghpat recensions, and in Haghpat recensions, they rarely discuss this pericope thing, interestingly so. Instead, they discuss Gregory Nazianzen's oration, and they try to elaborate on Gregory's words. They mention, when it comes to pericopes, they mention the reading from Epiphany, the passage on Epiphany, rather than nativity. And what they want to underline, mainly Vartan Haghpateti, be it Vartan Haghpateti or be it Vartan Areveltsi, who are the compilers of this recension, is that all these three have to be celebrated on the same day.
Yeah.
Tōnapatchaṛ is not, its units are not always the same. Some of the units can extensively discuss the pericopes and interpret the pericopes, the readings of the day. Other units can even not touch the pericope issues. So when it comes to the nativity, they bring up the readings from the Epiphany and elaborate on Epiphany to emphasize that Epiphany is the same nativity, that God first appeared during the nativity and then during the baptism. So this nativity, Armenians call theophany, not Epiphany, really, theophany, Աստվածհայտնություն, and their premier aim was to emphasize exactly that this has to be called theophany, neither nativity nor Epiphany, but theophany, and baptism is a theophany as well, because God manifested himself during the baptism, and they have to be celebrated together. All three have to be celebrated together: Epiphany, and baptism, and nativity. But it rarely touches on the units on nativity, rarely touch on the pericopes. They are very polemical indeed, and they don't really quote from the Gospels and interpret. They opted for actually quoting from Gregory Nazianzen's orations. Why? Because I explained the context. There was this church union, and apparently Gregory's texts were pre-Chalcedonian texts, were serving as sort of neutral texts that could bring both parties. I mean, they could sort of lay for two parties a middle ground, or serve as a middle ground. But of course, Armenians would interpret in their way, Byzantines would interpret their way, and even Gregory's text couldn't serve as a middle ground or middle way. That's why Haghpatեցի and Arevesti do not really quote from Gospels. They don't really want to do that. They want to go more polemical, and they quote from Gregory's texts and elaborate on Gregory's text, trying to actually, through Gregory, playing around with Gregory's some expressions, to emphasize that theophany combines these three.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much indeed.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you both. I think Andy has the next question.
Yeah, thank you very much, Anna, for this crash course in the Tōnapatchaṛ. I have well, so many questions, but I'll just reduce it to two. One of them is, so you've shown that the Tōnapatchaṛ very much connects to the history of commentaries on the lectionary. Is the Synaxarion brought up in some cases, or is that completely separate, kept separately?
Absolutely. I mean, Synaxarium is there. In every feast day commentary, it is a multi-genre, multi-layered collection. That's why it's very complicated. And it is also complicated to present, because you have many genres in one unit and many layers. Synaxary is there because if it's a feast day of a saint, the Tōnapatchaṛ starts exactly with Synaxary. So it gives the passage from Synaxary. Some are from the Synaxary of Konstantinopol. The others are later Synaxaries, but it's there. So for say for Peter and Paul, the feast day of Peter and Paul, or the feast day of Jacob and James, they start with the Synaxary, and then they give the pericopes and the interpretation to pericopes, and then after that they give some polemical stuff. So they some sort of a conclusion or a summary, but very much charged with polemical material. This happens especially when it comes to feast days or veneration days of a saint, a martyr. Synaxary is definitely there. So you have different passages, different layers. Synaxary, pericopes, the interpretation of pericopes, maybe some passages from patristic material, and then a conclusion or a summary which is very polemical. And I speak about Haghpat recensions because with Kamrjadzor recensions, you have a different picture. It is a bit, I would say, I have said this word many times today, boring, but it's rather more a plain recension than Haghpat recension. In Haghpat recension, you have all these multi-layers, a multi-genre patchwork. But in Kamrjadzor recension, you have pure units, orations by Yerevan, by Chrysostom, by some Armenian Catholicos like Zakaria, or by Lastiverti. So you have these pure orations as Tōnapatchaṛ units for a feast day. But in Haghpat recension, you have all these intertwined genres, passages, layers, which makes it very difficult on the one hand and extremely interesting on the other. So that's why I opted for studying Haghpat recensions first. And also because this prominent Vartan Haghpatetsy, who is absolutely, I would say, overlooked author and very little studies author because there is little material. And later Vartan Areveltsi, who is this prominent Armenian doctor of theology, created Haghpat school recensions of Tōnapatchaṛ, especially because of these two persons and the nature and the structure of the Haghpat recension. I decided to study exactly this. So the synaxary you have definitely not in each and every unit or each and every feast day interpretation or cause, but you mostly have it when it comes to the saints veneration or martyrs veneration. It's there.
Yeah, thanks very much. That means that I'm going to have to start looking at the Tōnapatchaṛ then as well. Can I ask another question, Georgia? Or
Go ahead.
is it
Sure.
okay? Which is, you've mentioned the use of Ephraim now several times. So I'm just curious, because you mentioned in the case of the Ascension, so just generally, I don't even know a text by Ephraim on the Ascension, so that in itself is interesting. Can you just say a bit more about this? Is it just, so is it Ephraim, is it Syriac Ephraim? Is it already translations from Greek? Do you know?
I know that most of the time it's translations already into Armenian from Greek, but there is one, what was that? Let me remember. I studied that very long ago. There was one, Tzurd. I don't know how to translate it to English.
One of the hymns. One of the hymns is that's one of the hymns. The Madarashi.
Yes, the hymns, which is written in Armenian script, but it's Syriac. And I know that Mar already worked on it and already reconstructed the whole text, which apparently does not belong to Ephraim. It is a spurious hymn. But it is in Tōnapatchaṛ, it is preserved also in Tōnapatchaṛ, written in Armenian script, but Syriac. Syriac, of course, is distorted, but it is already studied by Nikolaios Mar, and he recovered the text, translated it into Russian, and published. It is a publication of, he published it long ago. So this might be a very good material to study again, I think. Other than that, all units attributed to Ephraim in Tōnapatchaṛ, those are translations.
From Greek?
From that I don't know, from Greek,
okay.
Or maybe from Syriac. That I don't know, especially when it comes to Haghpat recension. I can say that in Kamrjadzor recension, we would have translations from Greek. I mean, those translations that survived in Armenian and are published by Mkhitaryists, most of them. But in Haghpat recensions, since we have these prominent people who also speak and Syriac, and they traveled a lot, Vartan Haghpatetsi definitely knew Syriac. I don't know what was the level of his Syriac, and also Vartan Areveltsi definitely knew Syriac, and again, I don't know what was the level of his Syriac. Both knew, and I don't know whether, I never studied this, whether they translated the passages from Ephraim from Greek or from Syriac. What I can say, there is this interesting commentary, interpretation on Gregory's orations, where they draw heavily on a Syriac author's interpretation or commentary on Gregory's orations, Elia the Syrian, who was Orthodox, which means he was from Orthodox Syrian Church or a Jacobite, so-called, definitely. And it is a translation from Syriac because I was able to detect the Syriacism in the text. My Syriac is very poor, but I managed somehow, based on my knowledge of Syriac and also with the aid of Levon Ter-Petrosyan's book in Russian, which was recently published, where he gives all these great molds, how to detect the Syriacisms in Armenian. I used those, and I could detect many Syriacisms in this text. Unfortunately, I cannot find this author, and I have presented this material twice, I think, already, and no one from scholars of Syriac studies can identify this author. So this is something that I was able to detect, Syriacism. But as for Ephraim's passages, I never looked into that. Actually, that was beyond the scope of my research, because if I have this huge material in my hands to cope with, I have to publish all 3 volumes, then I can go with the micro topics to investigate, more interesting, more nuanced topics and questions.
Yeah.
If
Thanks
I
very much.
replied, if I answered.
Definitely. I'll take Ephraim with me for my next project. I didn't realize there was so much material, so that's going to be fun. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much indeed to both of you. Skippered.
Yes, I have just one more small question, because we're talking about synaxaries. Do the authors of the Tōnapatchaṛ discuss the question of the integration of the 2 calendars that we have in later Armenian lectionaries, the Romadir type and the Hayadir type, how this went on and how this would have to be arranged?
Not really. Not Romadir. They discuss Julian calendar and Armenian calendar mainly.
Yeah, but not the.
Very little is found about Romadir calendar.
Mm-hmm.
There are some passages, especially in Haghpat recensions, but I will need to find them. I don't have them at this point at hand. But they rarely discuss Romadir as it is. In some recensions, there are passages, but in recensions that I work on, like the earliest ones, manuscript 2021, that is Haghpatetsi, and manuscript 4139, both kept in Matenadaran, that is Areveltsi's earliest recension. It was copied by his disciple, and he was then alive. So they worked side by side. So this is very valid, actually, copy. Here, I mean, only once maybe one can encounter a discussion about Hromadir.
Okay, thank you.
Caroline Massé.
Yeah, thank you. It was really fascinating and an enormous work. So thank you very much. I have two small questions. In one of the colophons, there was a mention of Peter of Alexandria.
Yes.
But as far as I know, we don't have anything in Greek from Peter of Alexandria. And my second question is whether you found some quotation from Dionysius the Areopagite in the Tōnapatchaṛ.
As for Peter of Alexandria, this is a huge question for me as well, because sometimes the authors in the colophons give names which are not relevant, and also sometimes those are also extorted names. So here, for example, is it here? No, I didn't brought that colophon. Okay, I didn't quote that colophon. Names are distorted, or sometimes those are not relevant. So about Peter of Alexandria, I don't have much to say. As for Dionysius, no, unfortunately, I haven't encountered any quotations from Dionysius. That would be very interesting for me as well, because right now I am also working on interesting later translation, fragmental translation of Dionysius's works in 18th century, which is absolutely unknown to scholars who work on Armenian translations of Dionysius. And I searched for texts in Tōnapatchaṛ. I never encountered anything from Dionysius. Gregory Nazianzen is there. Chrysostom is the pre-Chalcedonian. Of course, Dionysius was regarded as pre-Chalcedonian, pseudo-Dionysius by Armenians, but I cannot recall anything from his works. Neither the mystical theology, nothing from his works. It's mainly Gregory Nazianzus, Ephraim, 5th century and late antique. Late antique authors, church fathers, mainly.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
We have just two small questions in the chat before we can wrap it up. One is whether there is discussion about Arachavor in your text. And the second one is whether there is much Latin or Byzantine influence.
Arachavor, there is a unit dedicated to Arachavor, and we have variants or versions. There is a lengthy variant and a brief variant or version. Of course, all of them are based, both of them are based on Samuel Kamrjadzor's commentary, or it was an oration, or on Arachavurats. But they also deviate a lot. In Haghpat recension, we usually have the brief version of this unit. In Kamrjadzor recension, we have not complete a longer version. And of course, in this unit, the discussion evolves, first of all, on the fast of Nineveans, and later on the on this legend of Artiburi or Artivuri, which was popular among Byzantine theologians and chronologists, and it was circulated, and it became the important part of polemical treatises, both Byzantine and Armenian response. Armenians would have this set of polemical responses, and Artiburi, or the legend of Artiburi, was important part of it. So it is reflected in Tōnapatchaṛ in its entirety. Vartan Arevertsi also mentions that Shnorhali spoke about that. They bring up also this Byzantine source, which is was known as Pseudo-Isaac or Pseudo-Isaac, but now it is already, not now, decades ago, it has already established that the author was Efthymius of Peribleptos, a monk from 11th century, late 11th century, second half actually of 11th century. So yes, Arachavorats is there, definitely, and in Haghpat recension it has a very polemical vector. It is very polemically, truly polemically charged. It touches upon Gregory the Illuminator's narrative. It touches upon allegorical things like 5 days of fasting as 5 senses of man. It also elaborates on Nineveans fasting, and also on Jonah, of course. And last but not least, it speaks about the legend of Artiburi, and of course tries to refute the legend and prove Armenian tradition right. And the second question, is there a Byzantine influence? It is I think it is very authentic thing. Tōnapatchaṛ is a very authentic thing. I wouldn't say there is a very Byzantine influence. I would say this is an anti-Byzantine things. And what define influence in what sense? I mean, if it's in textual sense, in what sense Byzantine influence? I mean, if you could clarify, whoever written the question.
Unfortunately, Albert had to leave, so he cannot clarify
okay.
what he meant.
Okay, I would say that Tōnapatchaṛ is a very authentic, very genuine collection. In what sense Byzantine influence? I wouldn't say there is as I understand it, a Byzantine influence. More, I would say more Syriac influence than a Byzantine, or 50-50. But most of the time it's pure Armenian position. I mean, it is written, it has been written for to define the pure Armenian position, to antagonize with both Byzantine, especially Byzantine, because of diaphysitism. I would say in Tōnapatchaṛ, especially in Haghpat recension, you would find more Syriac influence than Byzantine.
Great, thank you very much. And on this note, I think I can ask you all to join me in thanking once again Anna for this great paper. And thank you all for joining and for a rich discussion during the Q&A. And see you next time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thanks, everyone. Have a nice day.
Thank